it amazing? Dukakis wore a helmet, and it was over on that Jeep scene. Howard Dean, your cousin, had the scream out of enthusiasm, thinking it was funny or whatever, and he was done. Today, you can do just about anything, and you're never done.
Yeah, as we've seen over the last several years, last decade probably. Anyway.
Welcome to Motivational Monday, conversations with David Ibarra, and today I have a special guest, Peter Corroon. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, David. Great to be here.
Well, Peter, I want to jump right in and start talking about some of your accomplishments. But before we do that, tell the audience a little bit about you, your beginnings, and I'd like you to talk about education and things of that nature, where you went to college and all of that.
Sure. And first, before I forget, and then I'll get in trouble if I don't do this, I have a wonderful wife, Amy, and 3 wonderful children, all of them who are either in college or just graduated from college. So, that's my greatest achievement, I would say. I've married above myself, as my father used to say.
Getting family right is really important.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you have.
Absolutely. So
perfect.
It's never not easy, but obviously your family's the most important thing you need to focus on. So.
Without a doubt.
But I was actually born in New York City, in New York Hospital, although I didn't grow up in the New York, New York City proper, but grew up outside of New York City till I was 12 years old, and then moved to Connecticut for high school, and then went to Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon University to study engineering. So I was the kid who played with the erector set growing up. They don't use those anymore, but love to build things, and I'm still doing that to these days.
How did you get to Utah?
So it's a sort of a funny story. I have a twin brother, Chris, and he came out to Utah. He was actually trying to get into ranching. He'd spent a year in Australia on a dairy farm and wanted to come back and get into ranching here. So he went to Boise, thought that was nice, but not the place. Then he went to Denver, thought it was a little bit maybe too urban. Went to Wyoming, and maybe that was a little too rural. And then he came to Salt Lake and said, "This is the place." So we've heard that. We've heard that expression.
Those lines before.
Anyway, he came here, never got into ranching, but got into the real estate business, which we're both in, and we're partners together on projects. So.
Oh, is that right? So now you're in a partnership with your brother.
Yeah, actually, I've been in a partnership with him since 1994. So
I didn't know that. Now, I met your brother a couple of times.
Yeah.
Very nice gentleman.
We're twins, so
but not identical.
No, not identical.
Yeah,
He's
right.
He should have been the politician. I ended up being the politician.
So you came to Utah because Chris...
My twin brother was here, yeah.
Okay.
So I followed him. I actually graduated from law school in San Francisco, where I had lived and worked for 5 years, and came. It was a tough economy at that time, and so it was about 94. So he said, "When you come out to Utah," and I did. Found a job here practicing law for a few years, and then slowly started getting into real estate investing and development, and here I am.
Now, had you already met Amy?
No. So Amy actually was living in Portland at the time. She grew up in Salt Lake, and her father was a general contractor, and so we got to talking with a friend of her parents, and found out she was coming into town, and they said, "Why don't you take her out on a date?" And I was a single guy at the time, so I said sure, and here we are 26 years later.
Everything worked out.
Everything worked out, exactly.
So you're going along in law school. What came after that? Or not law school, in practice. What came after that?
So I was practicing construction, real estate, labor law, and then decided I wanted to build affordable housing. So I actually went and worked for the Department of Housing and Urban Development back in Washington, D.C. for a year. I learned a lot, but probably not a lot about what I wanted to learn about. But the first thing I learned was that our government is run mostly by 30-year-olds. They're the ones who are doing all the work for the staffers, for the administrations or congressional representatives. I also learned that our government doesn't work very well, and thank God it doesn't, because if it did, we'd be in real trouble. So if they were able to do half the things they wanted to do. So
in other words, they'd outspend it?
They'd outspend it, and those checks and balances do work, so it keeps people in line from doing a lot of things that they shouldn't be doing.
What was it our founding fathers said? If democracy works right, it's as slow as molasses.
Yeah.
So you can't get in too big a trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
If it works right.
Exactly. But I lived in Washington, D.C. for a year, and if you live in Washington, D.C. and don't get interested in politics, there's something wrong with you. So, or government, I should say, government or politics. So I used to walk. I lived in an area called Foggy Bottom, and used to walk down the mall all the way to my job at HUD, which was closer to the Capitol. So. And I read a book. I used to read while I was walking to work.
No, that's kind of hard to do. That's kind of like texting and walking.
Yeah, fortunately, the mall is a pretty straight shot. And so I read a book called, I think it was Democracy for America by Alexis de Tocqueville, which was, basically said that, this country is basically the greatest country in terms of its systems and its politics. And so that got me interested in politics. And
who was the secretary of HUD while you were there?
It was Andrew Cuomo. So
is that right?
Got himself a little trouble since then, but he was the governor of New York. But he was a seemed like a good guy to be working for at the time. He said something though. I remember the first day I was at work. He said we had the greatest budget ever, and I thought, what does that mean? And in government speak, the greatest budget means the biggest budget. So when I ran for, when I was Salt Lake County mayor, I wouldn't say the greatest budget was the biggest budget. I would say the greatest budget was the most efficient budget.
And he probably followed this statement and make sure we spend it all, so next year's will be bigger.
Yeah, that's if you didn't spend it, you lost it. So
I'm going to come back to that county mayor. I want to talk more about that, but you continue on, and if I'm not mistaken, don't you have a cousin
I do. I know you're going.
Pretty prominent politician in his own right.
He was at the for a while there. He was or is Howard Dean. He was the governor of Vermont. Also ran for president of the United States. Got pretty high up there, and then he had they call it the Dean Scream, and that was the end of the campaign. Although he's certainly a bright guy, and still is out there politicking.
Isn't it amazing? Dukakis wore a helmet, and it was over on that Jeep scene. Howard Dean, your cousin, had the scream out of enthusiasm, thinking it was funny or whatever, and he was done. Today, you can do just about anything, and you're never done.
Yeah, as we've seen over the last several years, last decade probably. Anyway.
So you got in. You started getting interested in politics. You moved back to Utah.
Yeah, I was moved back to Utah. It was an internship at HUD, so I came back after a year.
How old were you?
I was that was probably the 90s, so in my 30s. Late 30s. So. And
came back and started working as.
Started working for myself, trying to build affordable housing. Built my first project in 2000 down on 900 South and 200 West.
I've seen it.
Called the Sophie Apartments, named it after my daughter. But then I decided I was going to run for political office, so donated that building to a nonprofit organization, and then ran for Salt Lake County mayor.
You ran for mayor against Workman,
Nancy Workman.
Nancy Workman. Just a thought popped into my head. I think that's one of the first time that I met you.
Probably was.
Yeah, I remember vividly, and you're probably hoping I don't bring it up.
I don't want to know what you're thinking, because I don't remember the first time. I remember subsequent times.
It was a knock on my door.
Oh, okay.
And guess what you were asking for?
Asking for money or a vote? That's when
you were asking for both. And I'll never forget, Peter. You'll remember the conversation. I didn't say much, and you were suffering. You did not want to ask me for the amount you asked me for. And then finally, I couldn't. I was laughing inside. I said, Peter, it's not. You're running for office. You better get to the ask. And then you asked, and
you said yes. I do. I did. And you were very generous to me over the years. So I appreciate that.
And you had no chance of winning at that time. No chance of winning. And you never know what happens when you prepare yourself, you go forward, you knock on the doors. There was an incident that occurred that we're not going to get into. It's unfortunate if you're in politics. There are a lot of decisions you make, and some can be controversial. And the mayor made a decision that blew up into a controversy, and you end up winning.
Yeah, and I didn't even get 50% of the vote at that time, because there was a third-party candidate, a former Congressman Merrill Cook, who was in the race.
That's right.
So
yep.
I think I got 49%. Ellis Ivory was actually the ultimate Republican candidate who I ran against, who's a great man and has done great things in this community.
Yeah.
And so I just snuck in there and got fortunate to get reelected by 2/3 of the vote. So had a fun 8 years. Greatest job I've ever had.
You know, what I remember is that you weren't quick to articulate what you wanted, but over about a 2-year period, you got real precise in being able to articulate what you wanted to do and how you were going to do it. But then, more importantly, the actions that followed to do it. Tell us a little bit about getting elected and finding out you won, and then what was your biggest surprise in starting as the county mayor?
Imagine if you could have learned the Live Ready lessons as a child. Now imagine your children learning these principles through engaging stories, sing-along songs, themed games, and more, all designed over many years with real educators. With Yes Our Kids Can, this dream becomes a reality. Don't miss this chance to shape your child's path to extraordinary success. Enroll in Yes Our Kids Can today, and be sure to give your child a successful tomorrow.
Well, so I wasn't even planning on running. Somebody came up to me and said, do you want to run for the Salt Lake County mayor position? And I said, well, what does the Salt Lake County mayor do? And I'm sure that's not a uncommon thing for people to say, because a lot of people don't know what Salt Lake County government does, even though it affects their lives every day. But this also ties into Howard Dean as well, because it was the same year Howard Dean was running for president. And after the scream, his campaign was over, but we still had volunteers left, and all of a sudden there was somebody came up to me and said, "Do you want to run for Salt Lake County mayor?" And it's like, sure. So we already had a campaign. It was now going to shift to, instead of the presidency, it was going to shift to the Salt Lake County mayor's race. And so a lot of the people who were helping on the Dean campaign ended up helping me run for office. And I'm probably not the typical guy who would run for politics. I tell my wife, she doesn't believe me, that I really don't like to speak a whole lot. There was always a shy, quiet kid growing up, where my twin brother was more the gregarious one. But I got interested in politics, and somebody said, "Why don't you run?" And as I like to do, it's like, sure, why not? Let's give it a try.
Peter, one of the things that I recall in describing you when I was asked, it's unusual, and I want this taken right because it's meant as a compliment.
Thank you.
It's unusual to see somebody that is kind, that is running, that is quiet, that isn't boasting about themselves, but talking about you, what I'm going to do for you. in a quiet, kind way, and it ended up resonating for you, and that's kind of the way you were known in our state, and as the quiet giant that got stuff done.
I appreciate that. Well, somebody once told me, I didn't have fire in my belly. I said, well, fire in my belly is usually indigestion. So, what I prefer is, getting things done. And so, I prefer just to try to get the job done and try to do things for the community. And, like anything else, I went in there, I'd never been in politics, never had a large staff. But I was smart enough to know that I wasn't that smart in terms of government. And so I hired some very bright people. And
tell me about some of the people that you bring on that you really found to be a delight and really be able to deliver what you had wanted from them as far as the area of talent that you needed, and they bring.
Yeah, well, my chief administrative officer was a guy named Doug Wilmore. I knew his father. He was a government politics wonk, and so he sort of knew a lot about policy, and we implemented a lot of great ideas that he had and others had. I had Karen Okabe, who had worked in government. She just passed away recently, but she had worked in several layers of government and knew a lot of people and was a good soul, and so she was a good person to reach out and work with others. Nicole Dunn, who was, she was, somewhat new in politics and young, but she, again, she was a bright woman and had some great ideas and was good at
a real strong thinker.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Good at working with other people. I feel like I should start naming everybody, but we had largely women running our departments, and they were all great to work with. We also had Dale Carpenter, our economic development director.
Dale. I met him shortly thereafter. You were elected, and he was great friends with Senator George Mantis.
Yeah,
and just a solid person. What did you find when you first started was the hardest thing that you had to get your arms around becoming a new mayor?
Well, figuring out what everybody does, and as I mentioned, Salt Lake County touches everybody's lives. And at that time, when I first got elected, we also had the largest population to provide municipal services. So Salt Lake County's unincorporated population, which is actually larger than Salt Lake City's population when I got in there. So we did the garbage, the street paving, all the things that a city would do. But then we were also a county government, which is essentially a subsidiary of the state government. So we did health services, mental health, substance abuse, ran the jail, sheriff's office, elections, most of the recreation centers in Salt Lake County, senior centers, libraries.
Doesn't the county's largely responsible for much of the infrastructure, and it's even the parts that are in Salt Lake City. Often, much of it is ran and developed by the county. Is that right?
Yeah, it's true. So the senior centers, as I mentioned, recreation centers. Salt Lake City doesn't run recreation centers. Salt Lake County runs the recreation centers in the city and other cities as well. So,
Bravenel Hall.
The Bravenel Hall, Rose Wagner Center, Capitol Theater. The new Eccles Theater, those are all run by Salt Lake County as well.
What about the convention center?
Convention centers as well. It sounds like you know more about county government than I do.
Well, when he gets into it, is a lot of the people that look at all of these, great facilities that don't realize that they're not run by Salt Lake City. They're run by the county. The county has a lot of they make a difference. They make a difference. They got a lot of control of what's going on in the heart of the city.
Yeah, just about everything from birth to death. So we do the birth records, and then one day somebody came into my office and handed me the check register. It was over the holidays, so it was my job to go through the check register because I was the only one around. And it had a check to a funeral home. And I said, why are we writing checks to a funeral home? And apparently the county's also responsible for indigent burials. So if somebody somebody's indigent and passes away, then the county works with the funeral homes and pays for that.
So oftentimes I learned this along the way myself, is that some could argue that the Salt Lake County mayor has more responsibilities than the Salt Lake City mayor.
That's probably a good point. The city does run the airport, which is obviously a huge organization, but Salt Lake County's budget is over $1 billion, and they just run a lot of different services.
Very good. So you decided to run for a second term.
Yeah.
Was that an easy decision?
Yeah, it was. It was a very easy decision.
Mm-hmm.
I was having a great time. And before I got in, I said I would run no more than 2 terms, and so I decided, well, I love this job. I'm going to run for a second term. We still had some projects we wanted to work on, some parks and recreation things that we had going on. So
on that election, 49%, or was it
no,
66%?
66%, roughly.
Yeah,
give or take a half a point. So.
And you didn't have to knock on very many doors for contributions. They were probably knocking on yours.
Yeah, it was amazing how many friends I had at that point.
Well, let me ask you: when you left after your second term,
I lost all those friends. all those gifts they wanted to offer me beforehand.
Yeah, that's gone.
They weren't offering them anymore. No more tickets or all the things I couldn't accept. I now wasn't being offered.
Yeah. So you finished your second term.
Yeah.
And then what did you have in your mind you wanted to do after you completed your election or your running of the county? What did you want to do?
Well, I'd still had my real estate business as well, and so decided I wanted to go back and work in real estate. It wasn't that big, so I was working part-time with other groups, trying to do projects in redevelopment areas, and worked with the Ninigret group, Jonathan Ruga at Sentry Financial as well, so working on their real estate projects.
Do you still work with them?
I still work with Jonathan Ruga at Sentry Financial, owns some property out in the Granary district, and hope to do some great projects there. So that's what I like to do, is work on projects in redevelopment areas or affordable housing projects. And so I worked with Spy Hop Productions, built a new youth media center with them. Been working with Centro Cívico Mexicano, built some 61 units of senior housing. Now we want to build a new civic center as well. Working on a project, a student housing project, which hopefully we can get financed for first generation college student housing, trying to be a link between the community college and University of Utah or other universities to try to help those first generation students. A lot of them aren't able to graduate, and that's because they don't, it's their first generation. They don't have that support network or know-how. So our goal is to not only provide them housing, but provide them the services and the know-how to push them through the college system.
That would be wonderful, wonderful project. Now tell me, what is it about? Give our audience, our listeners, a description. What is affordable housing?
So it's actually interesting because they're 95% of affordable housing in the United States is built using basically one program, the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which is administered by the federal government through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and then a lot of that's pushed down to the local states where there's housing agencies and others who implement that for them. So, and so affordable basically means housing to somebody where they're essentially less than 80% or lower of the area median income. So what does that mean? So for an individual in Salt Lake County, the area median income is about $36,000, and it can get up to almost $100,000 for a larger family. So would it be safe to say this is not Section A housing? This is for individuals that are employed in jobs, police officers,
accounting, or what kind of
So it's
occupation would somebody have to be able to qualify for affordable, or is there a qualification to get into?
There is, and your income can't be more than $36,000 if you're an individual. And the way they do it, they look at the rent for the whole, or the salaries for the whole county, and an individual shouldn't have to spend more than 30% of their income towards housing. So they base it on a range from the people with no income all the way up to somebody who makes about 60% of the area median income. That's for these low income housing tax credits. And so what happens is that I go to our state agency. It's called the Utah Housing Corporation. I say I want to build affordable housing, and they say, well, you've got to compete for it with all these other developers who want to do it. So so what you do is you come in, you try to build the most efficient project. They like projects next to light rail or bus lines, and so you try to find a property next to a light rail or bus line. They want you to build it as efficiently as possible, but they want some amenities as well for the tenants. So they don't want you to build a lower class housing. They want you to build as nice a housing as you would build for anybody. And so
the program, as I understand it, and you're going to correct me, I'm sure, the individuals in this segment of building developers, they compete for government money. People ask me all the time, well, why should my tax dollars go to affordable housing? I remind the folks that I serve, and most of them are affluent and business owners, it's because if we don't have a working class that is strong, that's who is selling the products that you sell.
Yeah.
If you don't care about, you can call it middle class, I call it working class, and that's where government tries to even it up a little bit, and that we all should be concerned, because the state of mind of the individual that is serving the guests or selling the products that you have, we all need to increase our talent base, and affordable housing is a big piece of that.
Yeah, and if you don't have affordable housing, you're going to lose families, and that's what we're seeing in Salt Lake City a little bit, where our student population, actually in the whole state, the student population is starting to decrease, and I think part of that is because housing has gotten too expensive. So they're either going to look outside Salt Lake City, or in some cases look outside the state of Utah to somewhere more affordable. And that's why if we don't have that, we're going to, it affects everything.
Now, what ends up happening, the federal government then ends up being the financer. The individual that comes in becomes the developer. Then they get a developer fee for developing it, and then they manage it for how long? How many years are you responsible to ensure that your building is run efficiently, that the occupancy level is to a certain level before the loans are paid off and the building property becomes paid out and owned?
So we work with agencies. In my case, it's American Express provides the money for that affordable housing. So in exchange for these tax credits, we sell them to the federal government gives them to us. We sell them to American Express. American Express gives us money to build the affordable housing, and then we get some other loans from the city and county as well. And then we're responsible for building this project and keeping the rents affordable based on these income levels we discussed for 50 years in Utah. So we have to keep that, somebody who's making 60% of the area median income, or $36,000 for an individual, and every year it will go up a little based on inflation, but we can't raise those rates to be more than 30% of that what that person makes every month.
50 years. I had thought it was 20. 50 years.
50 years after 15 years, roughly 10 to 15 years, your partner, in our case American Express, would go away. But in the state of Utah, you have to keep them for affordable for 50 years. The federal government only requires 15, but state of Utah tacks on another 35 years, so we have 50 years that we have to keep it affordable.
That's a
For some projects, I think. There's
interesting.
other ones they change it
Now,
based on.
I got to admit, I strongly considered getting involved, but then it was way over my head. It seemed to me to be way complicated. But I love the fact that we've got some developers that can look at a way that they can design something good, something that's healthy. And everybody wants the same thing. They want it affordable. They want to live in a safe environment. They want it to be clean. And that should be standard for everybody. I mean, our wants, dreams are just about the same. And to be in that segment, that seems like to me to be rewarding. Now, you've got a building right around the corner from mine where we're sitting. What's the name of that project, and how? And tell me a little bit, and how many people will that provide housing for?
Well, we're very imaginative in the name. We call it 144 South because that's the address. 144 South, 500 East in Salt Lake City. It'll be done in about a month from now. It has 110 units.
Wow!
And this project is for the people. All the units are for the working class folks you've talked about,
Perfect.
the teachers, firefighters, those who make this 60% area median income, and we're just starting the lease up now, so we're hoping some of the people who work in Salt Lake City, maybe some younger people starting a business, or some older people who are just wanting to trim down where they live and still have lower income.
Well, I tell you something, Peter, it's nice to see somebody involved in something that really has an impact on our society and our residents of our state and what have you, because it's really easy to go on the development side that frankly has a much bigger and faster return. So having a purpose, a culture-driven occupation, and still be able to make a living, because there definitely is nothing wrong with profit.
No.
We need it. But to be fair in trying to be the equalizer, because there's a lot of office buildings that frankly are not affordable for the group we just talked about. And yours is. I congratulate you.
Well, thank you. No, it's nice to wake up in the morning and feel like you're going to work to do something positive for the community, and that's what motivates me. And obviously, as you said, we all need to feed the family, so we make a decent living and do something positive for the community as well.
Well, perfect. Well, that's going to conclude our conversation today. And today was a pleasure talking to one of the nice guys of Salt Lake City who really has lived his political life and his after-political life in a fashion that we should all strive to do. Thank you for being on our program today, Peter Corroon. And we didn't even talk about your run for governor.
Thankfully. And David, thank you for being a positive role model in the community and what you do for young students, those first-generation students we just talked about.
Well, thank you.
Thank
you very much.